It's Iron Skillet week, which means we're breaking down the TCU and SMU football game. Melissa Treebwasser has Dave Wilson on the show from ESPN to talk about the game. Plus, TCU basketball gets a big recruit, and we're going to talk a little bit about why the Skillet's ending. And Tennessee did what with their ticket prices? All that right now on Frogs Insider. Hey, Frog fans, welcome into another episode of Frogs Insider presented by the Flying T Club. I'm Jamie Plunkett. Melissa Treebwasser will be along shortly with ESPN's Dave Wilson breaking down the Iron Skillet game. Very excited for this episode to hit your ears and your eyes if you're checking out the YouTube channel. A lot of people have been checking out the YouTube channel lately. It's been really fun to see. If you haven't yet, get over to Frogs Insider's YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button. We've got a really fun thing coming for when we hit 1,000 subscribers. We're a little over 600 right now. We got from like 280 to 600 in the span of 2.5 weeks. So let's go ahead and just get to six, whatever we're at, to 1,000 in the next 3 weeks. Let's just knock it out right now. And Melissa and I have something pretty cool for you coming up when that happens. We are, again, the Frogs Insider podcast presented by the Flying T Club. Head over to theflyingtclub.com today. TCU's NIL Collective, the only NIL collective for TCU. They support over 110 student athletes. They partner with a multitude of organizations in and around Fort Worth. They partner those student athletes with the organizations so that TCU student athletes are represented in the community, working with the community, supporting the community. It's a really cool setup that the Flying T Club has going on, and you can get involved just by going over to the Flying T Club today and checking out all of your options. Would highly recommend you doing that if you're a TCU fan. We're also part of the Dave Campbell's Texas Football Network. Very thankful to be a part of this podcast network. It includes a show for every single D1 football school in the state of Texas. That's 13 strong. So you get our content. You get content for SMU, UNT, Texas State, which I've been ragged on for not mentioning before, plus UT and A&M, Baylor, Texas Tech, all the above as well. Wherever you get your podcasts, just search Republic of Football Network, and that feed will pop up. If you only want the TCU content, if you just want to stick with Frogs Insider, totally get that. You can just search Frogs Insider wherever you get your podcasts or on the YouTube channel that I've already mentioned, and all of our content will pop up there as well. That's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and now Amazon Music as well. If you're an Amazon Music user, you can now get the Frogs Insider podcast right over there. All right, let's go ahead and just jump into this thing with both feet. Melissa sat down earlier this week with ESPN's Dave Wilson to preview the Iron Skillet game between TCU and SMU. Here's that conversation right now.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another preview edition of the Frogs Insider podcast brought to you by the Flying T Club. I'm Melissa Treebwasser, your host as always, joined here with a special guest, someone I'm super excited to have on the podcast. I would call you a friend, Dave. I don't know if you'd call me a friend, but I would absolutely call you a friend. I am joined by Dave Wilson of ESPN, I said before we started recording, a scholar of the Southwest era of college football and one of my absolute favorite authors. Anything you see a byline, Dave Wilson is an instant must read for me. So, Dave, we really appreciate having you on. You've taken some time to talk to us about the Iron Skillet rivalry and this great Metroplex throwdown that's going to happen this weekend.
Well, I appreciate you. I don't know. Well, first of all, yes, I consider you a friend. So
okay, good. I'm glad we got that cleared up.
And is this the Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend podcast? It feels
I'm always needing a friend. So yes, maybe.
But yeah, I wouldn't say I'm a scholar of the Southwest Conference era, but I'm a scholar of the writers of the Southwest Conference era who were the scholars of that era. And so I just love to read all those guys as much as I could. I'm a East Texas guy from Kilgore who grew up. I'm old, I'm 50 years old. So I grew up sort of at the tail end of it and getting to see it and watch it. My dad and I went to the last Southwest Conference kickoff luncheon together at the Anatole in Dallas, I believe. And so I still have the mug from it. I should find that. But so, yeah, I got to kind of see its tail end and kind of wish I had been there for that. So I probably have, engrossed way too much time in wondering what it would have been like in that era.
Well, I always tell people that outside of the actual game, my favorite part of the days leading up to the Fiesta Bowl and being at that experience was sitting in the media room with guys like you and just letting you guys tell stories and hearing about the history and the chaos and some of the fun things that happened during that kind of wild, wild west era of college football in Texas. And so that's where I first got to actually meet you in person. And I learned a lot about about things I had no concept of being from California and not moving to Texas until the late 90s. So that was definitely one of the highlights of that trip and that experience for sure. So you even got the Southwest Conference hat on today, which I love in honor of, I'm sure, the Iron Skillet game.
Yeah, I forget about it. It's just kind of my throw on a cap to take my kids to school kind of thing. And I was wearing it at Oklahoma last week, and they did not appreciate it. 2 weeks ago, they don't appreciate it as much up there. So they're like, "When are you going to write about the Big Eight?" And it's just like I don't know as much. I need to get engrossed in it too.
It's not nearly as exciting either. Well, Dave was in the press box for TCU's come from ahead loss to UCF on Saturday night. One of the more devastating recent losses for TCU fans, I think, not because of who they lost to, but of how they lost. And now the Horned Frogs have to kind of pick themselves up off the mat and head across the Metroplex to SMU to play the final game as we know it of the Iron Skillet rivalry that will occur in that high school. Well, you can't even call it a high school stadium, middle school stadium that they have over in Dave was telling me before we talked before we started recording, and he was like, I am not going to say negative things, blah, blah, blah. And so I told him I was just going to use this as my personal opportunity, talk crap about SMU for 30 minutes. But this is, a rivalry that I would say most TCU fans are completely okay with going away. I don't know. I think SMU fans would prefer to continue to play it, mostly because they have a lot of work to do to catch up with what TCU's done over the last quarter century or so. I'm just getting a lot of head shakes here. But this is, as we were kind of talking before, this is an important rivalry, but maybe not for the reasons that most people think it is. And it's become a very regional rivalry. And so what are your thoughts on just kind of the end of the Iron Skillet era and these two programs meeting for what could conceivably be, the second to last time, at least for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think you saying you think probably TCU fans are okay with it going away, and I just think that's sad. I'm not indicting the TCU fans. I understand what this is, but I think the whole thing is sad. I wrote a story a couple of weeks ago about how SMU had sort of got its guys. They got enough people together to sort of like make this push to get in the ACC, and a lot of that's financial and the commitment that they sort of recommitted to trying to play major college football. And I had a line in the story that, for years, so TCU was way ahead of the curve on SMU, right? They were in similar situations, but TCU committed to it. They had a coach in Gary Patterson who won as much as you could possibly win and sort of made them irresistible, I guess, in the Big 12 expansion. And SMU sort of lingered because of the pain of the death penalty and the embarrassment, and the university itself sort of came to grips with, well, is this what we should be doing anyway? You see a lot of universities that minimize athletics, and it's probably perspective that a lot of schools could use, but I had a line in my story that it was hard to get donors and backers excited about playing East Carolina when you used to play Texas. And some East Carolina fans were upset about this and felt like it was a shot. And I didn't mean it as a shot as much as, if you lose to SMU, you walk around the rest of the year pissed that you lost to SMU. If you lose to East Carolina, you maybe don't care as much. It's not that they're not good. It's that you don't have the history. You're not going to see the guys you play golf with or your buddies you go hunting with or the people at your church the next day that are the guys down the road. And that to me is the sad thing about realignment and college football. And look, I work for a TV network. I understand why it happens. I understand why the Southwest Conference died. There was too much of a split between private schools the size of TCU and SMU and public schools the size of A&M in Texas, and they were never going to have the same resources or priorities. They probably did have the same priorities, and they probably had similar resources, but they were never going to have the volume. And so it's a shame, but it's also a reality. I think I wish this game would continue to be played, but I understand that these things are all dying. A&M and Texas didn't play for all these years because they didn't want to give up a guaranteed home revenue game for a non-conference game, and that's why they're playing McNeese and Lamar and SFA, because allows you to get a win and cash some checks. And in the revenue sharing era, we're going to see more of it. So yeah, I'm sad that it's probably the end, but I also understand that that's just what's happening, and you can either um, embrace that and just say SMU do the same thing. Hey, we're going to go all in and get another home game and make more money, and or you can it's just a shame overall is the long answer to a short question.
You referenced the story that you wrote where kind of the headline became "Here Come the Billionaires" of SMU's journey to join the ACC. It was a fascinating story. It was just well written, well told. But can you talk a little bit about that investment that people came in and made to get SMU a seat at the quote unquote table, and why they were so willing to make that investment, and how much a rivalry with TCU, whether it's on or off the field, played into their desire to kind of catch up?
Yeah, I mean, SMU and TCU are similar universities in size and scope and everything else, and they, but the culture or the nature of the Dallas Fort Worth rivalry in its own self, Amon Carter would bring a brown bag with him to Dallas, so he didn't have to spend money in Dallas to eat lunch.
I've
And
never heard that before. That's incredible.
Dallas, looked down its nose at this literal cow town when they were the cosmopolitan, town with the people driving pink Cadillacs, selling Mary Kay, and that defines the entire rivalry, the culture of these two cities. And so when SVU and TCU both were left behind after the Southwest Conference imploded, TCU had a sense of pride of we're going to do this and we're going to get back and and they had these families who committed and invested and got them back into and started making conference moves. And SMU kind of was at a disadvantage because of the minimization of that had happened there. And there was not an institutional desire. There may have been some money guys that wanted to do it, but the institution as a whole was fine with where they were. And so they had to sit there and watch. And can you imagine being an oil man in Dallas who's an SMU guy and watching, TCU do this and watching Baylor, in freaking Waco of all places. You know what I mean? It's for them. We're in Dallas. We're right here. We had Doak Walker. We had, all these guys, and we're sitting here and watching it happen at other places. And so there became a build over the years of we can't stand watching this happen. And I really think Sonny Dykes was the guy that gave them the most hope all of a sudden. I mean, June Jones won there, but it kind of started to fall off. And the recruiting, there wasn't a lot of local recruiting. June was an NFL guy. He knew places all over the country. He could call people and get players. But they recruited Texas and they had Texas guys, but that wasn't the connection. Chad Morris came and he won a little bit, but he wasn't there very long, and he went to Arkansas. And then Sonny came in, and you started to see the Dallas on the jerseys. You started to see them use the portal. You started to see the billboards around town. It was a guy who just got it. This is what Dallas wants. Dallas wants its own team. The Cowboys had overshadowed them since they arrived in the 60s. SMU is a rather elitist school in the eyes, I think, of many people in Dallas, particularly if you're a young black kid in South Dallas. I don't think you felt SMU was your place. And by all accounts, these were gaps that they started to bridge. Rashad Samples told me once that, they made them all go eat lunch in South Dallas every day and spend their money and say, hey, we're here. We're in your town. We're in your community. You're not in ours. And they made SMU a place that was approachable and open. That was their goal anyway. And then they started winning, and they won 10 games for the first time in 40 years. And they had this excitement around it. And then for him to leave for TCU, you can imagine what that is. You can imagine that gut punch. Any of us can. And, I wouldn't say they're going to get over it, because they're not. That's the nature of the thing. I mean, Alabama still hates Dennis Franchione for leaving for A&M after a 10-win season, even though they had Nick Saban. right? You don't get over these things. But Sonny had an opportunity. SMU was still meandering, trying to figure out where they're going to get into a conference. Sonny had an opportunity to get a Big 12 job. He's a guy that had never had a, had a sort of middle to top tier job in a bigger conference. And so I think he just decided at one point, you gotta do it while you can. As windows and opportunities for coaches they don't come open very often. And so yeah, they won't get over it, and I understand that. And so that was a really, like, this is where we are. We're stuck here. If our last two coaches, Chad Morris goes to Arkansas, Sonny goes to TCU, how are we going to keep guys? How are we going to get recruits? How are we going to get people to see that we're getting over the hump? And so there's a realignment similar to the coaching window. There's a realignment window that opens, and it's impossible to get them. Obviously, SMU wanted in the Big 12 for years, and they felt like TCU or Baylor or whoever else kept them out. And that was not going to happen. So they wanted to go. They had conversations with the Pac-12. They thought that could happen, and then the Pac-12 crashes. And so, the ACC was it. And so they made them a deal. We'll take no TV money for 9 years, and we'll get in. I like to think, if you go back and look, TCU may be the last school that sort of won its way into a major conference by being so, because they didn't have the alumni base that a lot of schools do. They had the market a little bit in Dallas and Fort Worth, but they don't have a giant alumni base. They were good, and the Big 12 needed someone right then. They made a lot of sense. SMU may be the last one to buy its way, or the first one to buy its way in. And you can't begrudge them for that either. If they see an opportunity to do it, they say they're making, I think their TV contract in the American was like $6 to $8 million a year. And they think that the college football playoff revenue that you get from being in a Power Four conference is very similar. So they say, well, what's the problem? Well, you can't lose what you didn't have. So that's how they find themselves working their ways in, and they get in at a time when they're probably the last school that gets on the ship before the realignment deal closes up.
Well, I think that if there's a school that can buy its way in to, relevance, it's definitely SMU. There's no shortage of money with that university. But when you look at kind of their prospects for the future, and we know the ACC may well be a sinking ship. We're probably years away from fully knowing what that looks like. What is their kind of long-term perspective? Will they be able to continue to kind of just throw money at issues to stay relevant? Or are they kind of in a similar place as TCU, where enjoy what you have now because you don't know what might be coming down the pipe 5-10 years, and what college football as a whole will look like, and what private schools' places within that will be?
Look, I think there's a very common belief among most people involved in college athletics that there will be two there will be a one, giant level, like a Premier League.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear people say, well, you better win now, because if not, you won't get into the super conference. But I don't think winning is what gets you into a super conference. I think what gets you into a super conference is, markets and alumni, and base and eyeballs and attention. Sonny said last week at his press conference that people only cover the logos in college football; they cover the brands. And I think to an extent, you see that driven by attention, by appetite. You see what Colorado does when they get a coach that draws all the eyeballs, and they are on TV every week. But they're a large school in a big city, and in a big market, and I think there's only so many of the fun upstart stories that can get you there. And that's why I think what TCU did is so remarkable, because they don't have a giant living alumni base. They don't have a giant student body. They have money, and they have commitment, and they have resources, and they've done an incredible job. You walk around the UCF guys that were in town this weekend were like, we can't believe how cool the stadium is, how nice these facilities are, how nice this whole place is. And, they have 60,000 students or whatever. But I think that's the reality. You can buy your way to a certain level, but in the future, there's going to be a lot driven by eyeballs. And again, that's just the reality. It's not what I'm advocating. It's not what I want. Texas was playing UTSA this weekend, and I knew Arch Manning was going to be the story, but I wanted to see a great game in TCU UCF, and it was a great game. I mean, maybe not to the people watching this podcast.
It was until it wasn't, but
that's the sad thing. Like, college football is there is an attention gap, and that's hard to overcome, no matter how much you win.
You mentioned Sonny Dykes leaving and why why SMU fans are having such a difficult time getting over that betrayal, quote unquote. But let's talk a little bit about Rhett Lashley and how where this program is kind of headed in the trajectory. They've obviously not had the start to the season that they anticipated. They struggled against Nevada, but were able to kind of come from behind and pull out the win. And they drop a home game to BYU, a team that I don't think anybody expects to be competitive in the Big 12 overall. Last year, a 5-7 TCU team, kind of whipped them and doubled them up like 34-17. So as many strides as this SMU program has taken, it still seems like they haven't had a chance to kind of get over the hump. But they enter an ACC season where they have a relatively favorable schedule. The big game on their schedule was FSU. That no longer looks like a big game. Is this a team that can be immediately competitive in the AAC or ACC? And is Rhett Lashley the guy to take them there?
I think they have been very cautious about, look, we know we're not going to come in and take over. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was at the Texas State, Arizona State game on Thursday night, which was an awesome game.
It was a great game.
But you looked at it and you go, man, these Texas State guys are really little compared to the ASU guys. And ASU was not a good team last year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously they brought in transfers and they've turned it around too. But there is a size difference in a lot of these when you keep moving up the ladder. I think I think SMU knew that. They said, they went out and got 8 defensive linemen in the offseason in the portal. Now, because what looks like the problem is the offensive line. And so they know that they're going to need a couple of years probably to be a real factor if everything goes right. But I mean, Lashley's a guy who can score points. If they can figure out the offense and figure out how to overcome some of the issues on the line, and they've already addressed that by switching quarterbacks to a more mobile quarterback, then I think, it's a matter of, you watched A&M in week 1 against Notre Dame and the offense was abysmal, and you watched them against Florida and with a mobile quarterback, and it looks like it, solved a lot of their woes. And obviously Florida's not very good, but Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. So I think you could still figure it out. And I do think the conference is wide open. And so if they can get in some of these shootout games, I think they would feel good about that.
You touched a little bit on just Sonny Dykes and his journey and how he arrived to take what is effectively a type of dream job for him. You've told me tons of stories about Spike Dykes and your kind of coaching reverence for him and the person that he was and the way he went about his business. I think it's unfair to say that Sonny was only successful in 2022 because he inherited Gary Patterson's players. But you look at a situation where they go 5-7, and for a lot of reasons, they lost a lot of talent. There was an absolute hangover from that national championship game. But then to drop a game the way that they did in week 3 of this season, what is your assessment of what Sonny has done and what he's doing at TCU? And much like I asked you about Rhett Lashley, is he a guy that can elevate TCU to the top tier, the Big 12, which is where I think TCU fans rightfully feel, with all of the resources and the recruiting base and everything that they have, they should be annually?
Yeah, I mean, look, everybody's aware of that. That's always the narrative, right? Either when coaches come in and lose, they always say the cupboard was bare. And when they come in and win, everybody says, well, you're winning with the other guys. So the first years are fascinating to me. It's kind of something I like. I read about a lot, and I try to go back and look because, nobody remembers that Nick Saban lost to Louisiana Monroe in year 1 at Alabama. Yeah. And nobody remembers Mike Sherman lost to Arkansas State in year 1 in A&M. Now, Mike Sherman's not the end all be all, but it was like they were good. They became a solid team. But you have no idea what's going to happen when you take over a program. And I think TCU maybe at that point was a team that was just needed a voice change. And, Gary was a very demanding coach who had run a program very similar ways for a long time. And the game had changed some to where guys didn't stay or they bounced in and out. And I think Sonny was almost like, I asked him one time, how did you when I first talked to him at SMU, I said, "How did you do this? How did you get this thing going and get all these guys to come here?" And he said, "I told them, tell your friends to come here and have fun. Like, we're gonna play loose. We're gonna have fun." And I think at that kind of place, that was a message that they needed to hear, and that's what attracted people back to Dallas. In the transfer portal, a lot of guys go for the love and the attention and the big brands in the first go around. In the second go around, they want to find a good fit, a good place to play, a coach they like, a system they like. It's more about, how can I get good stuff on film and have fun doing it, because they've already been through the process. So I think, yes, year one, there was a lot of talent there, but I also think there was a really good sense of understanding what that team was. I remember him basically saying, it's Max's team. Chandler was a good quarterback, but this was Max's team. And so you ride the hot hand. But I think he had I've always thought the one thing that's interesting about Sonny is he has just a very common sense, simplistic approach to coaching. Like, if you do it, why would you do it if it doesn't make sense, kind of thing. So I think that worked really well for that team because they had pieces, they had talent, they just wanted to go play, and all of a sudden they had this new voice. So then you come into year two and they lose eight guys that were huge pieces. And I mean, if you look at Michigan this year, they had the same, like, I'm not comparing TCU last year to Michigan this year, but Michigan comes off a year where they lose 11 guys and they looked awful to open and against Texas. It's hard to replace that level. And Michigan is a place that it's recruiting 5-stars every year, and TCU is more of a developmental program. So it's even a slower thing. Now, yeah, the defense took a step back, and I think it didn't give them much of a chance. And so they had to make a change. And like I talked to coaches around the state who were like, it's really a shame about Joe Gillespie because he's like the greatest guy and everybody loves him. And so, they're going to have to move in a different direction. And then they did. So I think that's what was the hardest thing about this loss is there was a sense of excitement of like, the offense can be as good as it was last year, but if the defense is improved, we're going to be so much better. And then you saw the first half and it felt like we're there. And then I really think Gus just really schemed, he schemed them up really well in the second half, and they're good. I mean, they're a good running team. They were kind of a dark horse Big 12 team for a reason. But once they start running down your throats and you can't stop them, that's really demoralizing. And then that made them load up, and so KJ Jefferson was able to get the passing game going. So it was kind of the worst of combinations there. TCU not being able to run the ball and UCF figuring out how to run the ball. That was probably the most demoralizing part of it.
And then kind of my last question, as we look at these two teams playing this rivalry game, a rivalry that looks like it's kind of on the tail end, what defines success for TCU this season? What defines success for SMU this season? It doesn't necessarily have to be a win-loss record, but as you look at it from kind of the 30,000-foot view, where are each of these programs trying to get to in order to ultimately end up where they want to be?
Yeah, I mean, SMU it needs to, show that it's on its way to being a factor, and they're going to recruit well because they have an incredible collective and they have a lot to sell in Dallas. And in a major conference, that's the one thing they felt was holding them back. But people will want to see that they're making headway, and it can't be a bust. And then the same for TCU. I think you come off a magical year, sort of like there'll be books about that year, or there probably already are. But and then there's then you have a huge drop off, and so this is the one where it's like, I think a successful year for TCU is to really show that the defense is coming along. They know that they can throw the ball. They love Hoover. They've got weapons. I think it's a matter of like, are we building a program, or are we going to patch holes every year? And I think that's what every coach is a fly in my face. I think that's what every coach, we're seeing that over and over, right? That the schools that are loading up on transfers, sometimes that's not always the
FSU.
FSU is the number one example of that. And you're starting to see some of those schools and realize that, hey, building and developing is our way. And I think that's the challenge for TCU and SMU both, is to hold on to those guys. And so they want to see that. They want to see progress. They want to see a program being built, and they want to see retainment of players. And I think if you see that, then everyone's going to feel good about next year too.
So that kind of leads me to a follow-up that now I'm going to ask you one more question. Which team of these two on Saturday would a win mean more for, or a loss be more devastating for? Do you think where they both sit this season and their goals for their season, the expectations of their fan bases?
I think TCU probably, just because I can see a case now. Someone will call me a sort of a Texas football homer, but I could see a case late in the year where this UCF loss is not a bad loss.
Yeah.
Now, right now, the way they lost it is what's bad. But if you're looking later in the year, because I think, talking to Gus at Big 12 Media Day, I got the sense he thought they were really good. And he sees, we hear the KJ Cam comparisons. He's not Cam Newton, but he was the missing piece in Gus's offense last year.
He's 260 pounds. He's impossible to bring down. They were putting 3-4 guys on him.
I think there's still a lot ahead for TCU. And I think there is for SMU too. I'm not saying that was a tough loss to BYU, especially, with the first Power 4 game. But I think TCU has a chance to establish itself at the top of a new Big 12. And you don't want to start getting falling to the pack in that thing. So I think that does amp up the pressure for TCU a little bit because of the opportunity right now to be at the top.
I think that's a very, very fair assessment as the bell rings here for me while I'm in class. I want to thank you again for taking some time, Dave. You're always just an absolute fascinating person to talk to. I love hearing you tell stories about the Southwest Conference and Texas football, and just your journey to getting to have this kind of knowledge is fascinating. Like I said, anything you write is an instant auto click, a must read. So if you guys are trolling around ESPN, just look for that Dave Wilson byline. I guarantee you'll be entertained. You will laugh. You might even get emotional. I think I got emotional reading your oral history of the Southwest Conference story that was a couple years ago, because it was it's just such a cool, it's just such a great moment in time for fans of college sports and college football, especially college football in Texas. So really appreciate you taking some time and talking Iron Skillet with us, and hopefully TC will be relevant enough late in the season to have you on again.
Let me say one thing about TCU and the Iron Skillet. I do what I do because I love reading guys like Dan Jenkins. I don't think we would have Dan Jenkins as I think the most important college football writer of all time if it wasn't for the 1935 Iron Skillet, because 5-year-old Dan was in the stands and he was devastated by that loss, and he always goes back to it. So I think that's what the Iron Skillet means to me, is Grantland Rice, game of the century, Dan Jenkins. And that's a shame that that's what we're losing, but I think it means a lot to me. So appreciate you talking to me about it and having me on, and appreciate getting to write about it.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
A big thanks to Dave Wilson for taking the time out of his busy schedule to sit down with Melissa and do such an incredible job of previewing the Iron Skillet. TCU and SMU will play at 4 o'clock this Saturday afternoon. That's 4 o'clock Central Time on the CW over in Dallas. So I put a poll out earlier this week asking TCU fans if they agreed or disagreed with pressing pause on the Iron Skillet. As we know, 2025 is the last scheduled game between TCU and SMU. TCU and SMU could not come to terms on a contract renewal, and so TCU decided to hit pause on the rivalry. SMU wanted to make really clear that TCU was the one that pressed pause, not them. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why it has come to that in the Iron Skillet, because I think that it's a really easy opportunity to take a dump on TCU, to say that, they're big brothering SMU, or they're walking away from the rivalry for the wrong reasons, or whatever the excuse might be, whatever pen's being put to paper and written about TCU ending this rivalry. I think it's really just coming from an interesting standpoint. First, though, to the poll. As of the recording of this episode, 403 votes, 55.6 people say yes, it's time to move on from the rivalry. 44.4% of people say, no, keep the skillet. It's 44.4% of people want to see TCU and SMU continue the rivalry. And honestly, that's more out of this sample size than I thought would say that they want to see the Iron Skillet keep going. It is one of the longest rivalries in the state and in the country. But the reality is, at least in my opinion, it's probably in TCU's best interest right now to move on from the rivalry. And here's why. When you look at the current college football landscape and you start to evaluate what are all of the big-time blue blood programs doing? How are they cultivating some of the success that they can control? They're doing a couple of different things. First, they are making sure that they have multiple non-conference home games every single year. I don't believe I've seen a schedule where any SEC or Big Ten school has played fewer than 7 home games in the last 3 or 4 years. Texas does a masterful job of making sure that they rarely go on the road for non-conference games unless they're playing someone like Michigan or Arkansas or Alabama. And the reality is that TCU wants to project. They aspire to be one of those kinds of programs. Whatever you think of that goal, whatever you think of that dream, that is a dream of TCU athletics. They want to be a premier brand in college football. And in order to do that, they can't have years like we're walking through right now in 2024, where they have one non-conference game at home, and it's Long Island. It's the FCS game. And we're also in a year where TCU only has 4 Big 12 home games. UCF, Houston, Oklahoma State, and Arizona are the only 4 home games that TCU has this year. They go 5 on the road in Big 12 play this year. 5 home games is completely unacceptable. It's unacceptable for season ticket holders to be expected to pay the amount that they're supposed to pay. It's unacceptable for the university to allow that to happen. And Jeremiah Donati agrees with that. He wants to make sure that at minimum TCU has 6 home games every single year. And he would love to have 7 or 8 every single year. And I get why. Because this is all revenue driven now. The entire sport is revenue driven. And TCU's coming at it from 2 perspectives. We talked about the first one a little bit already. They want to be seen as a premier brand. The more opportunities you have to put your best foot forward on campus, whether that's opposing fans coming, making the best opportunity for your season ticket holders to come 7 or 8 times this season, looking great on TV as many times a year as you possibly can. All of these things go into putting your best foot forward. All of these things go into making sure that people are talking about TCU. So having more than 5 home games is a reasonable expectation if you're TCU at this point. It should never be 5 again, frankly. It's a little disappointing that it got to the point where they were going to have 5 home games because you could see it coming down the pipe for several years where they go to Stanford and they have to go to SMU. And so when TCU and SMU were having their renegotiation conversations back in 2023 about what the rivalry would look like after 2025, they started to talk about, should all of the games be in Fort Worth? Should there be a 2-for-1 that flips every 3 years? Should, whatever the other options were on the table. Jeremiah Donati negotiated what he felt was in TCU's best interest in those negotiations, and Rick Hart, the athletics director at SMU, negotiated from what he thought was the best interests of SMU in those negotiations, and that was to keep it as a home and home. They couldn't come to a resolution, and so the rivalry is put on pause. Is it disappointing? Sure. It's more disappointing for others than it is for me personally. But the reality is that TCU had a goal, and they went to a longtime rival and said, we have this goal. We need to alter the way this rivalry looks. SMU, which had every right to say no, said no. That's it. That's truly it. So I don't fully understand why the dunking on TCU is happening because the rivalry is hitting pause. Right. The second part of why I think this is in TCU's best interest at this point in time, even with SMU now being in a Power 4 conference, is the whole game right now, whether you love it or hate it, the whole game's about revenue. It truly is. That's one of the reasons it's so important to have as many home games as possible, especially if you're a Big 12 school trying to keep up with the SEC and the Big 10. Because you're already at a disadvantage financially just because of the TV contract. You have to try and find different ways to get the revenue up as much as possible because you've got a revenue gap with the SEC and the Big 10. You've got revenue sharing with student athletes coming down the pipe. You have scholarship expansion that's happening starting in the fall of 2025, theoretically, if the settlement ever actually happens. And so you've got to find a way, right? And starting in 2025, if the settlement actually happens, TCU is going to be one of the many schools across the country that's going to be down a couple $1 million just to start because they're of all the payback dollars, the $2.8 billion settlement that's going to be paid out over the next 10 years or whatever. It's coming out of NCAA tournament and basketball TV revenue. That's going to impact every single school in the country. It's going to disproportionately affect some of the schools in the country, and they're pretty pissed about it. And so TCU's at a point where they're fighting from behind when it comes to financials, and they're trying to make sure that their fan base has the best experience possible, and they're trying to put their best foot forward as a premier brand. All of those things are pieces of the puzzle. Whether you like it or not is not part of the equation. Whether you like it or not, that is the reality of the sport that you love. That is the reality of college football right now. Is it what's best for the sport? Probably not, but it is what is the sport right now. That's just the truth. And it's a hard pill to swallow, especially for people who have been paying attention to the sport for a really long time, especially for people who love the regional rivalries. I get it. And the day that TCU and Baylor stop playing, I'm going to be really disappointed. The day that TCU and Texas Tech stop playing, I'm going to be really disappointed. For some reason, whatever it is, as a guy who grew up in Dallas and went to TCU, I don't have the same kind of fire burning inside me for the Iron Skillet. I just don't. I know other people feel differently, but at the end of the day, it's not about my feelings. It's not about your feelings. It's about what's best for TCU. And I've also seen the argument as of late, since SMU has joined the ACC, oh, well, they're peers now, so you should reschedule the rivalry. Well, it still doesn't fix the home game issue because it just doesn't. If you want the home and home, it still doesn't fix the home game schedule issue that TCU is facing. It doesn't help SMU either to have to play a road game every single year, guaranteed, because they're not having a ton of home non-conference games that aren't FCS games either, right? And frankly, here's the deal about SMU and TCU when you start to talk about the two as peers. Conference affiliation doesn't make you a peer. It simply does not. Because, again, it all goes back to revenue, and it all goes back to how you've invested in the football program. TCU's been investing in the football program for 35 years. I can't even – was it – are we 30 years away from when the Southwest Conference broke up? It's 2024, 1404, 94, 30 years away from when that happened. TCU put their foot to the gas almost immediately and said, we got left out. We can never let that happen again. SMU got the death penalty 10 years prior to that and then spent the next 25, 30 years crying into their coffee. Oh, well, we got the death penalty and failing to invest in their facilities, failing to invest in their student athletes, failing to invest in anything of substance in that stadium to make it an experience worth watching, to make it an experience worth attending. And so when TCU got into the Big 12, they wiped the dust off their boots and said, we finally made it. When SMU got into the ACC, they waited for the ink on the check to dry, made sure that the check cleared, and then they waltzed into the SEC and blew up some balloons, or the ACC and blew up some balloons. So they're not peers just because of conference affiliation. They're not peers because one school worked its ass off to get where it is, and the other school wrote a check. And again, my feelings on the issue don't matter as much as the fact that SMU is still not a peer to TCU because they didn't do things the right way. They didn't. And I think if you look across the country, people would say SMU bought their way in. Congratulations to SMU for doing what they needed to do, I guess, but we'll see how long it lasts. And on top of that, too, before I get off my little soapbox and move on to other things, I think it's important to remember that rivalries have come and gone for the history of college football, right? LSU doesn't play Tulane anymore. Tulane was probably pretty upset about that. Ole Miss doesn't play Southern Miss every year. I will say one school that does a really good job of playing a directional school in state every year is LSU, because they do play a directional school in state every year. I would love for TCU to pick up something like that and make sure that they're playing at least one school in the state every year. But they already play 3 in Houston, Baylor, and Texas Tech, because they're all in the same conference, right? Other rivalries that have ended and come back: Texas and Texas A&M, Arkansas and Missouri went away for a long time, and now it's back. Arkansas and LSU wasn't a real rivalry until Arkansas joined the SEC. Arkansas, Texas is coming back again, right? Oklahoma and Oklahoma State is going away. The Apple Cup is protected for a little while. Oregon State is protected for a little while. We'll see how long those last. Hopefully they last a long time. But at the end of the day, schools are going to make the decision that they feel is best for them financially, because that is what is required of them in this day and age. And anybody who's dunking on a school for doing what the game is asking them to do at this point is not paying attention, or is unloading their own personal disappointment with the sport on a school that is just trying to play the game and survive. That's what it is. Hate the game. And I agree. I think a lot of the game now is disappointing, how financially driven it is. But I'm never going to fault a school, TCU or anybody else, for doing what they can to make sure that they're on the inside looking out. And that includes SMU writing a $200 million check. Do what you got to do. Do what you got to do, right? So those are my thoughts on that. The Iron Skillet will probably come back one day also. I don't think we're going to be sitting here in 30-24. TCU and SMU still have never played again. It's been 100 years, 1,000 years, whatever. I can't do math. But let's move on. We got some other things to talk about. TCU basketball got its first commitment for 2025, and it's a really big one. Number 61 overall rated player in the country. His name's Kayden Edwards. He goes by Bug. He's a Fort Worth native. He plays his basketball at Duncanville. He's a 4-star shooting guard, left-handed shooter, can score from all 3 levels. This is the 3rd highest ranked recruit TCU has ever gotten a commitment from. Now they got to get him on campus, but it seems like he's pretty locked in. He's been at TCU multiple times. He was at TCU over the weekend visiting for UCF. He took in a practice. He got some shots up in the gym. And he talked about, if you go read my interview over on hornfrogblitz.com, the fact that TCU basketball made it feel like more than basketball. He said that was a really appealing thing for him as he was at that point, considering where he was going to go to school. He did this really fun video commitment where he had a Colorado hat and a TCU hat. He put the TCU hat on, then he took it off. He put the Colorado hat on, then he took it off. He took off his jacket. He was wearing a Colorado shirt. And that's when my heart almost stopped beating, because I had just hit publish on my article about him committing to the Horned Frogs. But then he fortunately took that shirt off, and under it was a TCU shirt. This is a really good start to this class. It is an incredible start to this class. Just his commitment alone gives TCU the number 26 high school class in the country. There are a couple other guys that they are in on currently. Nigel Walls is another guy that was on campus recently. He's a stretch 4. He's about 6'10". He's very tall, very lanky kid who is, I believe, the number. He's another top 100, top 70 kid in the country from Houston. They've got a lot of irons in the fire for this 2025 class, but Kayden Edwards is an incredible start to the class for TCU. They got him over. Colorado was the other finalist. He also had offers from Oklahoma State. He had an offer from Arkansas. He had offers from LSU and USC. He was a highly sought-after kid, and it should be a really good addition to the Horned Frog program that Jamie Dixon is continuing to build. Let's see. The last thing that I want to talk about before we get into my 3 games of the week is this article. Another thing that I asked TCU fans on Twitter earlier this week. Tennessee is coming out, and across all of their athletics, they are adding a 10% talent fee to help raise money to give their players. I asked TCU fans, how would you respond if TCU began doing this? It was very mixed feedback. Some people said, if the game ends like it did against UCF, they should never do it. Other people said that absolutely, ticket prices are going up anyways, blah, blah, blah. And this is something interesting that I think I saw Joel Anderson, who formerly of Slate, formerly of TCU football fame as well, put out on Twitter. This isn't like the first time a school has ever raised its ticket prices. but it is one of the first times that they've assigned a specific line item to the ticket price increase. Like we've seen, and TCU fans, you know this well, ticket prices have gone up to help pay for the stadium. Ticket prices have gone up to help pay for increased coaching salaries. Ticket prices have gone up just because they go up, right? The sun comes up, so ticket prices go up is how it feels sometimes. The sun comes up and tuition goes up. All the prices of everything go up, because that's just what happens, right? But I've never seen someone say, a school say, oh, hey, by the way, our ticket prices are going up 4.5% this year because we got to pay the coach we just hired. Or, hey, ticket prices are going up 6% this year because you like that new box of sweets. You like the new seats in the end zone. Yeah, we got to pay for those. So it's really interesting to me, and Joel Anderson is the one who pointed this out again, that they're assigning a talent fee to the ticket increase that they're going to have next year. Why? Why wouldn't you just say the ticket prices are going up? It's a really interesting thing that this is the item that they chose to identify. This is the moment that they chose to identify. Oh, here's why ticket prices are going up. I just thought that was really interesting. I don't know if I have an answer, but I also know this. Tennessee made in 2023 about $39.7 million on athletics ticket sales. That's round up. That's about $4 million that they could expect to add to their ticket sales in 2024, 25, whenever this is happening. 25, I'm assuming. That's an extra $4 million in their pocket. That's not nothing, right? That's not chump change, especially when it comes to, oh, hey, we got to find a way to make sure that we can max out our revenue sharing. So I don't really blame them for doing that. I think it's a little weird that they're identifying the price increase as a talent fee. But that's just that. Will TCU ever do something like this? I don't think so, and here's why. Like I said, Tennessee's ticket sales in 2023 across their athletics was $39.7 million. I couldn't find a full athletics ticket sales number for TCU. Private schools are really great about releasing information, but I did see that they hit $2 million in ticket sales during the 2022 football season. That's just for football. So you take 10% of Tennessee's almost $40 million, you got $4 million in your coffers. You do that to TCU's $2 million, and you're talking about $200,000. And let's be honest here, $200,000 isn't even going to get you a left tackle right now in the NIL market. It's not going to get you a left tackle. So I don't know that the juice would be worth the squeeze for TCU to do something similar to this at this point. I do think it's going to be something that we continue to see. I don't think Tennessee is going to be the last school to institute something like this. I think a lot of other schools would be much smarter to just say, hey, ticket prices are going up and not assign. It almost feels like they're blaming the players, which is really weird. Maybe I'm reading something into it that's not there. Just really interesting. Really interesting stuff. Okay, let's get into the last thing before we dip out of here for the day. And again, while I'm vamping here, make sure that you follow on socials. Make sure that you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, subscribed, and leave us a rating and a review over wherever you get your podcasts as well. Check out flyingtclub.com. Check out the Republic of Football Network. I think I've hit all of our people again. There are some really interesting football games this week. Illinois and Nebraska is an undefeated ranked-on-ranked matchup, and I never in my lifetime thought those words would come out of my mouth. They're playing it Friday at Nebraska on a Friday night at 7 p.m. Nebraska is 8.5-point favorites, and I don't think that's enough points. I was up in Nebraska a while ago for a game. It was electric. I can't imagine what it's going to be like for an undefeated ranked opponent to come to town. I think Lincoln might burn to the ground. So I'm really looking forward to that one. 8.5-point favorite for the Huskers. I think they clear that. A interesting Big 12 matchup happening Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Kansas travels to West Virginia. If you had told me that this matchup would be between two 1-2 schools when the season started, I would have told you that you're crazy, because I figured Kansas would be 3-0. An absolutely wild and disappointing start to the season for Kansas. Their only win so far is over Lindenwood. And West Virginia's only win is over Albany. These are two teams that have not beaten an FBS opponent yet this year. West Virginia is 2.5-point favorite. It's in Morgantown. I think Kansas gets it figured out this week. I think UNLV is pretty good. and I think Illinois is pretty good. Those are the two teams that Kansas lost to. West Virginia lost to Penn State, and then they absolutely farted away a lead to Pitt this past weekend. I think Kansas is the better team. I think they win outright, even though they are the 2.5-point dog going to Morgantown. And let's be honest here. The last game of the week that I am paying attention to is happening in Stillwater. It's Utah and Oklahoma State. Quarterbacks with a combined age of 49. Cam Rising against Alan Bowman. I'm very intrigued by this football game. One, if Cam Rising plays because of his finger injury. And two, because I just don't know. I don't know that I know what Oklahoma State is quite yet. I think in the preseason predictions episode that Melissa and I did, I bought pretty high on Oklahoma State. I think I'm still there. But Utah's defense is for real, and if Cam Rising is healthy enough to throw the ball, they looked pretty good when he was healthy their first couple games, first game and a half of the year. So we'll see. That's another game that I'm paying a lot of attention to. Oklahoma State's currently a 2.5-point favorite. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that Cam Rising's status is up in the air. I think Oklahoma State does handle business here, though. I do. I like Utah a lot, but I like Oklahoma State more. So give me the Pokes, give me the Cowboys to welcome Utah to Stilly in only the way Oklahoma State fans can. That's going to do it for this episode of Frogs Insider. Thank you so much for taking time out of your week to listen. Again, make sure you've subscribed to the YouTube channel. Follow the Republic of Football Network wherever you get your podcasts. Follow Frogs Insider wherever you get your podcasts, depending on what you want filling up your podcast feed. Follow on socials. I'm at Frog Preacher. Melissa's at The Coach Melissa. And then go check out Dave Wilson's work over at ESPN. He's a fantastic, fantastic writer. We will be back on Monday morning, recording on Sunday night to recap the Iron Skillet, one of the last ones. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of opinions one way or another when we get to that episode. But until then, I'll talk to you next time, and go Frogs.